When we get into exterior shooting positions around vehicles, we want to remember that these are pieces of terrain that offer very poor ballistic protection. So we want to remember that we want to keep our silhouettes minimized and use the better pieces of cover on this vehicle. So if we can use the engine block and the wheel assembly, we're going to make that happen. Now, not all vehicles are designed the same. You're not always going to have a sedan to get behind that's of this, height and length and depth. There's going to be different vehicles out there that you have to use as some kind of protection or a piece of terrain that you can do work from or make a decision from to see how you're going to develop the situation in the fight. Another thing to consider is a lot of bad guys get in fights in very unpleasant neighborhoods where there might not be big giant SUVs. So we should look at what kind of vehicles we expect to encounter in the different environments we're performing work in to see what we can expect with regards to realistic ballistic protection when we use those vehicles as terrain. When we get into actually shoot around these vehicles, we want to have a premium on minimizing our silhouette while also getting in a situation that allows us to have some stability. So if we can get in just a regular kneeling position and drop our silhouette, awesome, we want to make that happen. Otherwise, we want to start to look at the validity of other non-standard firing positions. So if I come into a position around a vehicle like this where the hood is, of about waist height off the ground, I can get into what's called the junkyard prone shooting position. What that position looks like is this right here. What this position allows me to do is roll my gun onto the side, thus dropping my silhouette and minimizing the signature that I do have. Now again, I'm getting tight up onto my cover so that I can minimize the amount of exposure that I have. I can maximize the distance that the enemy has to travel on my flanks to expose me versus if I was offset and I was just kind of out in the open. During the initial stages of a gunfight, it is very hard to tell where the oncoming fire is coming from unless you have an immediate threat that you can see. So we want to make sure that we're manipulating this cover to our best ability with the shooting position we adopt. When I get into this junkyard prone shooting position, there's a few different things I want to think about with regards to how my rounds are going to impact downrange. The first thing I want to think about is stability. If I have a 2-point sling configuration like this, when I go to get it on top of the hood, I want to create a push-pull relationship with my sling and my pistol grip. So if I'm pulling back on my sling and pushing into my pistol grip, this is going to create some stability on the hood of the vehicle. So it's going to look something like this. What I'm then going to do with my support side hand is come over the top of either my optic or my barrel, depending on, my body type and what kind of equipment I've got. I'm going to come up in here. I'm going to grip either on top of this optic with a kind of like modified C-clamp or onto the barrel. Now, if I've got glass up here, if I've got a tube, it's probably going to be hard for me to grab up on top here, and I don't want to be messing around with my dials, so I'm just going to come in underneath. I've just got an LCO up here, so I can go ahead and just grab on, and what this is going to allow me to do is create those minor windage and elevation adjustments. If I try to adjust with my pistol grip, I'm going to overshoot my target in my adjustments, and this is going to set me up for failure. So I come in here with my support side hand and I grasp onto the gun. If I have a 2-point sling, I can have this push-pull relationship with the sling and the pistol grip, and I can go ahead and get tight up onto this hood, and I can manage recoil. From this position, I want to be thinking about how the arc of my bullet is going to change with regards to my point of aim and my point of impact, my mechanical zero. So we know that if we roll the gun onto its side, and I have my magazine facing off to the right, my rounds are going to impact low left. If I'm a left-handed shooter and I get into this position, my magazine's facing off to the left, I know my rounds are going to hit low to the right. So I want to take that into consideration. If I'm in a close quarter fight like this, the offset is going to be pretty minimal and you can pretty much go for a point of aim, point of impact. But if you've got a small target, a reduced size target, that's something you do want to consider. The biggest issue guys have with marksmanship tends to be their trigger control in this position. When we go to shoot in this position, because it doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't feel natural, we might be chicken winging our arm out, and this might cause us to really just kind of ambush that trigger and jerk it around. So if we go to zero in this position, if you go to look at what your point of aim, point of impact looks like, make sure that you have good solid trigger control so that you're getting good feedback on how your zero adjusts when you roll the gun onto its left or roll it onto its right. One of the other important features of this shooting position is making sure that the buttstock goes on top of your shoulder like this. If the buttstock is not resting on top of your shoulder, you're not going to be able to drop your silhouette. A lot of times shooters mess up this shooting position because they keep the gun seated in the pocket of their shoulder and they simply just roll over onto their side and they kind of invert themselves. When you roll over onto your side like that, you actually put yourself at a position where you're exposing more of yourself than you would be if you were just shooting the gun naturally like this. So we want to make sure that we have our buttstock up on top of our shoulder. And when it comes to the rest of our body, if we need to drop both of our knees onto the ground so we can get a stable firing position and drop our silhouette, let's make that happen. If we don't need to drop both knees onto the ground and we can keep one knee up so that we can stay mobile, let's go ahead and make that happen instead. All right, let's shoot this position and see what it looks like hot. Remember, when you're executing these positions, if you're not familiar with the movements, go slow so that you learn what the mechanics look like. It's too easy to outrun our headlights, not learn the utility of a position like this, and then you're having zero application in the real world. You're just kind of faking the funk. All right, let's shoot it hot. So we can see in this shooting position that you want to be able to make sure your silhouette is staying low and also reading the terrain, reading the environment. With this particular hood right here, we can see that there's some curvature in it where I might rest my barrel here is going to be different than where the barrel is here. So being aware of where my rounds are going to be exiting my barrel and seeing if I'm going to have positive effect downrange. If I go to rest my gun right here, I might have rounds that just go ahead and skip off the top of the hood. I'll need to correct. So something I can do to adjust for that is I can bring my gun up a little bit further onto the hood of the vehicle. Now, what I don't want to do is get sucked into the target. Another issue guys have with this particular shooting position is they'll get sucked in the target and they'll start to reach for the target. This typically happens when you're trying to change the angle of the shot you're taking. But what happens is if we overexpose ourselves, we're negating the purpose of getting in the shooting position when we could just be in a regular kneeling position like this. So that's something to consider is, you know, what's happening with the terrain that you are manipulating. If you go to get into this position, the validity is obviously how quickly can you make it happen, just like a lot of these other positions we're going to get into right now. If we find ourselves in a situation where we need to shoot around the front or the rear of the vehicle and we can't go over the top of the hood, or maybe this is an SUV where going over the hood doesn't make that much sense and we want to keep our silhouette low, we're going to take up a kneeling position. Now, when we get into our kneeling position, we want to be very proactive. We never want to just shoot from the position that we end up in. We want to read the terrain and we want to adjust our fighting position as necessary. A very poorly regurgitated argument on the flat range is against the reverse kneeling position. And what that looks like is this right here. If I go in to take a support side shot or a weak side shot and I bring up my backside knee to gain stability, a lot of guys will not realize the validity of this position and they'll just scream that because your reverse knee is up, you're going to get your femoral artery shot, versus if you were in a traditional kneeling position like this where you drop your silhouette and now if there's any kind of incoming rounds, you're not going to get shot in the leg. So yes, this is true. If you're in a reverse kneeling position and you're not paying attention to your silhouette, you could be unnecessarily exposing yourself. But we're actually trying to think about how to process information, not just regurgitate what some guy said on a flat range at some point earlier in our career. There is a lot of benefit to switching up your kneeling position. By staying in this conventional kneeling position right here, I'm limiting the range of motion that I have with actually engaging targets in front of me. So if I'm in this position and I need to go ahead and clear down on my sector, I'm minimizing the movement that I do have. So if I have to come out for some reason to engage a target off to my right, I have to go ahead and come across my body like this. This is very unnatural, and look what I'm exposing. The femoral of my other knee, versus if I was a proactive marksman and I'll just regurgitate dogma that's been taught to me. If I switch up to a reverse kneeling style and a reverse kneeling stance, I can come in here and I can actually aggressively clear out my sector, be in a much more stable shooting position, and then collapse back down immediately if I need to. And I'm not doing this weird cross-legged, torso movement right here that has me completely off balance and does nothing for me with regards to stable marksmanship platform. The other thing I want to think about too is if I have this reverse knee up, it allows me to have some stability when I take a shot off of the side of this vehicle right here. So if I have my reverse knee up back here, I can bring my elbow down onto the meaty portion of my leg. Again, never having joint-on-joint contact because that creates too wobbly of a platform. But if I can bring this up, it allows me to stabilize the shot. Now, I might only be taking a shot out to 20 yards, but if I'm taking a shot at a reduced size silhouette, I think it's pretty important to have a stable platform as if you were shooting out to 200 yards. Doesn't really matter. We want to make sure that we have the right mindset to set ourselves up for success, and we're not always thinking that we're going to have full targets to work with. All right, let's get ready to see what that looks like hot. So I'm being a proactive shooter. I'm recognizing I don't want to overexpose my silhouette here. I'm staying low, but I'm going to change up my kneeling position so I have more stability and can actually clear more of my sector over here. All right, so be proactive in your fighting position. Don't just end up in a spot and think you got to stay in the same position. Always read the environment, read the situation, adjust as necessary. If we're in a situation behind a vehicle where we need to conduct a reload, whether it's a combat reload, TAC reload, speed reload, whatever the popular term is now because it's been 6 months since we rebranded the title. Let's go ahead and think about what makes the most sense if I'm using this as ballistic protection and to mask my silhouette. So a lot of guys are taught to do this workspace reload where they bring the gun in at a 45-degree angle, they drop the magazine from right here, they cant it over to the side a little bit, they go for their emergency reload source, and they insert it, and they get back into the fight. You see a lot of competitive shooters do this. With regards to working around vehicles, I don't think that this is the best way to set yourself up for success. The reason behind that is you go ahead and just ridge line your position right here. So if you do drop down to do a reload or to work on your gun, you're still flagging exactly where you're at so that the enemy has no longer just a suspected location of where you're at, they have a known location and they can start stitching up rounds right here, okay? So that's something to consider. What I think is a better technique to use is to just do a standard combat reload. And whether that's you leave the gun pocketed in your shoulder like this, or you push it off to the side like this so that you can actually get close to your mag well. But we want to keep the gun level, and this helps us keep it from, going and overexposing our position right here. This is how I was originally taught how to do a reload. There wasn't really a name for it at the time because the internet didn't really dictate how we changed the nomenclature of a lot of the different tactics and techniques. We just called this the nods reload. And the reason behind that was if you went into your workspace, hypothetically your barrel might hit yourself in, the eyes. Or excuse me, in your nods. Whether or not that's going to happen, just made more sense to keep this gun in line with where the threats are and to minimize any kind of excess movement. So that's something we want to consider in and around these vehicles. All right, let's see what that looks like. Something I want to consider when I'm using this vehicle as a piece of terrain for protection is, I don't want to be coming up in the exact same spot. So if the last data point I give the enemy is right here, if I can just offset my position even just by a few inches, that's still causing him to react to me. So if he has his sights trained in on where he last saw me and I come up in that same spot, I'm making it easier for him to shoot me. If I have to make him adjust his sights just a little bit, that might be enough time that gives me an advantage. Now, obviously, these vehicles are very confined spaces to work around, so it's gonna be hard to get small, but try to set yourself up for success. All right, let's shoot this. Now, since vehicles are such poor pieces of cover, they're pieces of terrain that we don't want to hold on to for too long. So we always want to be thinking mobility. What's the next piece of terrain I can move to in my environment so that I don't get stuck behind something that doesn't provide that much cover? Now, with regards to non-standard firing position, I think you should try to stay upright as much as possible. Getting onto your side, rolling over into these different prone positions, I really don't think they make that much sense in the middle of a complex attack unless you have an immediate tactical advantage to gain. There's 3 different positions that have become kind of more popular with regards to shooting underneath vehicles. You've got just different rollover prone positions, you've got some shrimp prone positions, and you've got the wheel well prone positions. Again, I do not think you should be getting onto your side unless you have an immediate tactical advantage to gain. Going back to earlier what we talked about with guys kind of going through drills where vehicles are not really used with how you'd manipulate them in the real world. They just kind of run up to them and for no rhyme or reason, they'll roll over onto their side. So we'll see guys, they'll just run up to a vehicle and they'll immediately just roll onto their side like this. Now, we can see that the issue with getting into that position is you're completely exposing yourself over on the flanks. I don't think that that's a very smart thing to do, because even untrained enemy can just skip rounds unintentionally underneath a vehicle, and he doesn't got to kill you. If he can get a mobility kill, if he can get some kind of junctional arterial bleed going, that is going to take you out of the fight. And unless you've got the right equipment to stop a junctional wound or stop a junctional arterial bleed, you're probably just going to bleed out in place. So we want to maximize the best ballistic protection on these vehicles, and we want to use positions that are going to keep us mobile. Now, in the event that you do find yourself having to shoot underneath the vehicle because maybe there is an immediate tactical advantage to be gained, you want to know what positions to get into and what the pros and the cons are behind them. So let's take a look at them now. The first position we're going to get into is called the wheel well prone or the axle prone. And what it is you're just getting on all fours behind this tire or this wheel assembly right here, and you're going to pivot the gun underneath the body right here. So what that looks like is something like this. So when I get down into this wheel well prone position, it's very important that I try to stay as close to what is actually going to stop a bullet behind this piece of protection here. So when I go to get down on all fours, I want to keep myself as small as possible. Now obviously this is a very uncomfortable position to get into, so if you're not comfortable getting into and out of it very quickly, go slow, learn what it feels like, then learn what it feels like to get small. When I go to drop down into this position, I'm simply just going to place my gun into position on the ground, and I'm going to bring my eyes to my sights. Now I know when we shoot carbines we say never bring your eyes to your sights. With regards to this position, getting into it and out of it very aggressively, it makes more sense to get the gun positioned and then bring the rest of our body towards it and get a sight picture than doing what we normally do with regards to getting our body set and then bringing the sights to our eyes. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to get on all fours behind this vehicle, and I'm going to bring the gun into a position where I'm going to shoot in underneath. When I go to shoot this gun, I want to get it as close to the ground as possible and just kind of let it sit. I'm going to ball up with a fist in my support side hand, bring it in underneath my barrel right here, and this is again going to be my windage and elevation adjustments. With my shoulder, I'm going to come in and just pin it across the top of my buttstock. If I can somewhat seat it on top of my bicep or my shoulder, that's going to be great. Otherwise, I'm just going to pin it towards the ground so that I have some kind of recoil management taking place back here. I'm going to bring my eyes down to my sights and get a sight picture and go ahead and take a shot. Again, this position is very disorienting. If you get something from your combat snapshot where you see I have an immediate tactical advantage, or maybe the only shot I can take is underneath the vehicle, I think this is a good position to get into because you stay somewhat mobile. You're staying somewhat upright even though you're inverting your head and your eyes. By staying on your knees, you're still in a position where if you need to, you can sprint out of this position and you're not completely on your back or on your side to where your silhouette would be further exposed away from the vehicle. All right, let's go ahead and shoot this shot. Something to consider is if I was shooting this from a right-hand position, my ejection port is facing into the dirt. I want to make sure I'm creating enough space with that support side hand with the ball of my fist so that my ejection port isn't going straight into the dirt and inducing malfunctions. This is the wheel well prone or the axle prone. It's a good position to get into and out of. It's very limiting with your situational awareness. If you have a tactical advantage that you can immediately exploit, this position becomes valid, but it's very disorienting. And you lose a lot of situational awareness. So understand its applicability. Another position we can get into that allows us to shoot underneath the vehicles while maximizing ballistic protection from the wheel assemblies is the shrimp prone. And this is just simply rolling over onto your side and getting into a good tight firing position. Now, with regards to this position, again, I'm not the biggest fan of getting onto your back or rolling over onto your side unless you absolutely need to. I think that this is a position that, you know, if you have taken a mobility hit where you're not gonna be able to move away from this piece of terrain and, you know, guys are coming in to end the day for you, this is a position that might allow you to at least stay in the fight. I don't think this is a very good proactive shooting position because your silhouette goes from being uptight against your ballistic protection to being all the way exposed 5, maybe even 6 feet away. So what we want to think about is how that changes your profile with regards to the enemy's angle of fire on you. If I am going head on with an enemy that is directly back from me, that position might work. But if I have unknown enemies coming in from multiple different directions, I'm exposing myself 5 feet beyond where my ballistic protection is, and this could be drastically overexposing my body. Now I know when I get behind this wheel assembly, it might not seem like I'm overexposing myself, but if I have targets off to my left or off to my right as I face down range, this could be putting myself at an extreme disadvantage. I don't think it's a great position to use proactively, but if you find yourself needing to use it, you need to know how to use it. The way this position works is you kind of shrimp up real tight. You make sure your feet stay on the wheel assembly so you can brace yourself, you're not overexposing your signature. You're gonna wanna rest your carbine somewhere in between your legs and your knees to where you can get a comfortable sight picture, sight alignment. Now, how much you actually rest your carbine in between your legs is gonna depend on the size of your gun, if you've got any kind of kit on, and your overall body type. But what we're looking for is trying to stay small and create a stable firing platform. So again, I'm getting in tight, keeping my feet on the wheel well. And you can already see how much of my profile, my silhouette is exposed because I'm offsetting myself. I bring my gun in tight right here. If I can get my magazine well in between my kneecaps, I'm gonna go ahead and position it there and then bring my eyes to my sights. With my support side hand, if I can create like a pool cue kind of motion with my fingers and create some space for the barrel off the ground, I'm gonna make that happen. Otherwise, I'm just gonna make sure that I have good, clear line of fire from my muzzle. As I roll over onto my other side like this, shoot a support side shot, we can see that I'm gonna go ahead and get tight behind this wheel assembly. I've got my magazine inserted between my kneecaps right here, and I've got my support hand actually kind of pulling up on the barrel. So with these non-standard firing positions, a lot of it's gonna depend on your body type, the angle of the shot that you're taking, and how comfortable you feel getting into and out of them. So there is set criteria for them, like, you know, keeping your feet up against the wheel assembly, but when you actually go to get that carbine in a position, find out what works best for you with regards to creating a stable platform and minimizing your silhouette. When we shoot this position, we want to be very aware of where our muzzle's at. Again, it's very easy to get sucked into the situation, not be paying attention, and we also want to think about what our situational awareness is like at night. We want to be very aware of where our muzzle's at in this position. You do not want to shoot your feet on accident. So if you're unfamiliar with this position, take time to learn the proper motions, the mechanics of getting into and out of it. Don't try to go too quick. Don't try to do too quick of a ninja breakdance fight move or whatever. Don't try to go too quick into and out of the position. Learn the mechanics and the movements of getting into and out of it so that you have it if you need to use it. Otherwise, stow it away in the inventory because it's probably not a go-to position that you want to use. All right, let's shoot it hot and let's see how much I have to adjust myself to stay tight behind this ballistic protection here, this brake disc, and what my actual consistent rate of fire is. So I've got my feet up against the wheel assembly right here. I'm gonna go ahead and get in tight, trying to minimize my silhouette as much as possible. I'm gonna come around so that I can actually take a shot. So we can see that this is a position that is not too quick getting into and out of. If we're trying to stay proactive and keep ourselves in the fight, might not be the best position to go into because it extremely limits our mobility. We're on our back. We're also exposing our silhouette in depth with regards to our ballistic protection. So if the angles of the fight change, we could be putting ourselves in a very bad situation. Know how to use this position though. You get hit, and this is going to be the last piece of terrain that you're on until you're in the dirt. Use it. Take as many of them with you as you can. Another shooting position we can get into underneath the vehicle is the SBU prone. This is a position where you get as flat as possible. You roll the gun over onto its side and you try to keep your silhouette pretty low. It looks like this. So we can see with this position, it's pretty natural compared to the normal prone position we get into. What you're losing with this position though is, again, you're having that issue of overexposing your silhouette in depth. So if the angle of the fight changes and you actually need to be getting pretty small, it might not be the best position to get into. Another thing you're losing is you're on your stomach. You're no longer mobile in that position. And if you got to roll over onto your back because you have an immediate, close contact engagement, or if you need to get up and move from this terrain to another piece of terrain because we might still be in the kill zone, it's not going to really set you up for success with speed and mobility. We want to know how to use this position though, because we might have a tactical advantage to exploit because we see something change in the terrain and we need to take a shot underneath the vehicle and be familiar with getting into this position. Traditionally, this position is very hard for guys to get into with kit or body armor on, and you pretty much got to be slick or have minimal gear on front. Otherwise, it's very hard for you to drop your gun down, cant it off to the side, and maintain a low profile, a low silhouette. Another thing too is if we go to shoot underneath these vehicles, a lot of times we have very limited space to work with from the ground up until the body. So if we cant the gun too high off the ground, we might actually not be having a clear line of sight. So when I go to get in this position, I'm going to roll the gun onto its side. I'm going to try to minimize my silhouette as much as possible. And I'm going to come in with like kind of a C-grip like this onto my optics and do my windage and elevation adjustments. So that looks like this. So we just looked at the validity of different firing positions in and around vehicles. Again, vehicles offer horrible cover. So if we got to take shots from them, we want to look at the ways that we can minimize our silhouette while providing some kind of stability and sending rounds downrange. We should always be looking at the next piece of terrain we're going to be moving to. I don't think that getting onto your back, onto your stomach, or off your feet generally is a very good idea in the middle of a complex attack. If you have to keep moving, it's not a very good idea to set yourself up for failure by getting onto your side, onto your back when you don't need to. Also, if you're going to be unnecessarily exposing yourself by rolling over and using this wheel well as some kind of cover, but your legs are sticking out and your torso sticking out up here, you're exposing a lot of the vital parts of your body that are really hard to fix. If you get some kind of junctional arterial bleed, unless you have the right equipment, it's going to be very hard to stop that. If you don't have the right equipment, it's going to take your buddy just dropping a knee in there, and that's going to be taking a buddy out of the fight and putting yourself in a bad situation. We're going to wrap all this up with just a mini vehicle scrambler around this vehicle using these different firing positions and getting into and out of a position very aggressively and decisively. The way we're going to do this though is we're going to pattern it after the real world. So this is an exercise that requires me to shoot in different positions, but I'm not going to be running around the vehicle with no specific rhyme or reason as to what I'm doing. The other thing I want you guys to pay attention to is my movements. Getting into and out of the positions is going to be very deliberate. When I move from the front wheel assembly and the engine block back to the rear wheel assembly, I'm not going to be having a lot of unnecessary, overly animated movements. I'm going to be taking my combat snapshot, gathering those data points, making a decision, and moving to the next piece of protection on this vehicle. I'm not going to be doing a lot of this bobbing and weaving around unnecessarily that really does nothing for you other than make you look cool on the flat range, but set you up for failure in the real world. All right, we're going hot. All right, shooters ready, stand by. Shot. All right, those are some different positions you can get into and out of around a vehicle. If you can't get into a specific position, just think about minimizing your silhouette and trying to maintain some kind of mobility. Again, if you get onto your side, you start getting off your feet, that might set you up for failure. When we go to do these scramblers like this, always think about how you can maximize the best parts of ballistic protection on this vehicle and not overexposing your silhouette. If you need to come out and clear a sector, be aggressive with it, do work, suck up back tight to where you know there's some kind of protection between you and incoming rounds. Another thing we want to think about too is if I am always training on sedans and I'm always thinking about how to use sedans, I need to think about how I might interact with a different type of vehicle in the real world. If I'm using an SUV like the one behind me, I might not have the option to go over hoods or trunks. I might need to be standing, might need to modify some kind of a crouching position so I can get in behind ballistic protection and have my gun pulling security. So be smart out there. Always try to use these vehicles as you would in the real world. Think about security, mobility, minimizing your silhouette.